don't think it is. Hello, good evening. I'm just trying to get the old technology working and go live on both Facebook and Instagram with my faithful canine companion. Now, Beetle, I'm really hoping is going to be interested in this evening's activities because we've had a lot of fun choosing our selection of books this evening. Well, over the last few weeks, really, Beetle and I have been going through all of my favourite doggy literature, and she has had a lot to say about it, though this evening she's gone incredibly floppy and tired and doesn't seem to be quite so interested. So in a way that's a good thing, because it might mean that we are able to speak more calmly, but it might also make it less entertaining for viewers, because Beetle, for anyone that's seen her or met her, is quite a crazy dog on the whole, but I think it's kind of her bedtime, so she's feeling quite relaxed. So thanks for joining me this evening. I'm very excited to be talking to you about dogs in literature. And as you can see, I am a fan of The Hound, which I have been since childhood, because we were lucky enough to have an Alsatian when I was quite little. And I think a lot of people would have fallen in love with dogs through either their childhood companions or, in fact, through the books they read as children about dogs, which might have been what got them interested first, which could have been Snowy in Tintin or Snoopy in Peanuts, or, of course, many others that we're going to mention. And Lottie, great to see you here this evening. Thanks for joining me. Lottie is remembering our dog Odin, who was my first love in canine form, and he was a lovely big slobbery Alsatian. And now instead we've got Beetle, the lovely Vizsla, who is a very gorgeous hound, and we love her very much. And she, as I said earlier, has had lots of exciting comments about the books that I've been reading in preparation for this evening. So I want to leap in with some of the childhood reads, which I think you might know, and if you don't, you should definitely discover. One of my favourite childhood doggy books is Because of Winn-Dixie, and also The 101 Dalmatians, which you would definitely be familiar with 101 Dalmatians, I'm sure, but I'm going to read you a little bit out of Because of Winn-Dixie, because it's one that isn't necessarily so well known in England, but it has actually been made into a film, and it is a really fantastic book. It's one of those books that if you read as a child, you will, without a doubt, want a dog. And I made the fatal mistake of giving this book to my daughter Calypso, and that's really what set us down the track of getting a book ourselves. Hi Lorraine, lovely to see you this evening. Thanks for joining us. I would love all your comments as we go along this evening about dogs that you love in literature. So please do send in your thoughts on Instagram and Facebook. So I'm going to start off reading you the very beginning of Because of Winn-Dixie, which I do think is a fantastic start to any novel, and particularly fantastic for dog lovers. Chapter 1. My name is India Opal Bologna, and last summer my daddy the preacher sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice and 2 tomatoes, and I came back with a dog. This is what happened. I walked into the produce section of the Winn-Dixie grocery store to pick out my 2 tomatoes, and I almost bumped right into the store manager. He was standing there all red-faced, screaming and waving his arms around. Who let a dog in here? He kept on shouting. Who let a dirty dog in here? At first, I didn't see a dog. There were just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor, tomatoes and onions and green peppers. And there was what seemed like a whole army of Winn-Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same way the store manager was waving his. And then the dog came running around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly, and he looked like he was having a really good time. His tongue was hanging out and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and smiled right at me. I'd never before in my life seen a dog smile, but that is what he did. He pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth. Then he wagged his tail so hard that he knocked some oranges off a display, and they went rolling everywhere, mixing in with tomatoes and onions and green peppers. The manager screamed, "Somebody grab that dog!" The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs. You could tell all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time he was having in the produce department. But somehow he ended up knocking the manager over. And the manager must have been having a bad day because, lying there on the floor right in front of everybody, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him, real concerned, and licked his face. "Please," said the manager, "somebody call the pound." "Wait a minute," I hollered. "That's my dog. Don't call the pound." All the Winn-Dixie employees turned around and looked at me, and I knew I'd done something big, and maybe stupid too. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't let that dog go to the pound. "Here, boy," I said. The dog stopped licking the manager's face and put his ears up in the air and looked at me like he was trying to remember where he knew me from. "Here, boy," I said. And then I figured that the dog was probably just like everybody else in the world, that he would want to get called by a name. Only I didn't know what his name was. So I just said the first thing that came into my head. I said, "Here, Winn-Dixie." And that dog came trotting over to me, just as if he'd been doing it his whole life. The manager sat up and gave me a hard stare, like maybe I was making fun of him. "It's his name? Honest?" The manager said, "Don't you know not to bring a dog into a grocery store?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "He got in by mistake. I'm sorry, it won't happen again." "Come on, Winn-Dixie," I said to the dog. I started walking and he followed along behind me as I went out of the produce department and down the cereal aisle and past all the cashiers and out of the door. Once we were safe outside, I checked him over real careful, and he didn't look that good. He was big but skinny. You could see his ribs. And there were bald patches all over him, places where he didn't have any fur at all. Mostly he looked like a big piece of old brown carpet that had been left out in the rain, like he does on the cover. "You're a mess," I told him. "I bet you don't belong to anybody." He smiled at me. He did that thing again, where he pulled back his lips and showed me his teeth. He smiled so big that it made him sneeze. It was like he was saying, "I know I'm a mess. Isn't it funny?" It's hard not to immediately fall in love with a dog who has a good sense of humour. "Come on," I told him. "Let's see what the preacher has to say about you." And the two of us, me and Winn-Dixie, started walking home. How could you resist the beginning of a novel like that? And Winn-Dixie is no ordinary dog. It's because of Winn-Dixie that Opal, the heroine, makes all sorts of surprising new friends, and that she actually has the courage to start asking her father, the preacher, about her past. So Winn-Dixie, this much, is responsible for sending Opal into many new realms of understanding about her family. And that's one of the things that dogs do in literature as in life. When you have a dog, they bring your family together, and they also give you opportunities to talk about things that you might not talk about previously. Tracy, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. You've also got red hair, and Tracy's saying that I should have told her how much fun it is to be a redhead. Well, it was my mum that told me first how great it is to be a redhead, and because she was a redhead also from a bottle for a long period of her life, and that's what got me into it. And that's probably also what made me so attracted to Vizsla the dog, because she's kind of a redhead as well. So Getting distracted here. Jacqueline, hi from Maryland, USA. Great to see you here this evening. And hello, lots of lovely people on Instagram. Alana Banana and the Grady one. Great to see you here. Do send me your thoughts about which are your favourite dogs in literature, because there's a lot that I want to mention tonight. So 101 Dalmatians, that's one which I'm sure many of you will have seen the film, but have you read the book? If you haven't, you absolutely must, because the book is so much better than the film. We do know, I mean, the film is great too, but the book has so much more fun, subtlety and humour in it. We know the bare bones of the story from the film, that it's about the kidnapping of a family of Dalmatian puppies. It was originally serialised in a magazine called Woman's Day as The Great Dog Robbery. And it's all about the happily married couple, Pongo and Mrs., the dogs, and their stolen puppies. It's actually lovely in the book how Dodie Smith brings out the superiority of the dogs to the humans. She says the dogs are vastly superior to the humans, though the dogs are very fond of them and consider them as pets who are gentle, obedient, and unusually intelligent, almost canine at times. And like many other much-loved humans, these dogs, Pongo and Mrs., believed that they owned their dogs instead of realising that the dogs owned them. Smith was a dog lover herself, and she owned 9 Dalmatians. So she obviously was speaking very much from experience. But in this book, which is a delightful adventure story, there is genuine horror also lurking within the book, because when the puppies are all trapped in Hell Hall, having been stolen by Cruella de Vil, they fling a bone over the wall, which is scratched SOS, save our skins. They're literally wanting to have their skins saved. And that's a horrifying thought. It's not just an innocent children's story. It actually is all about dogs being skinned, which is a really hideous idea. It's a particularly poignant book to read, you might say now, in these unusual times that we're living in, because when we were all in lockdown, hopefully a lot of us are not so much in lockdown now, but some still are, you can relate to the poor dearlies sitting sadly on Christmas Eve, that's the humans, waiting in vain for their dogs to come home. And he makes the comment when he puts some carols on the gramophone that carols are always beautiful, but if you're feeling sad, they can make you feel sadder, which is a very mysterious thing. There's one of my favourite scenes in the whole of literature is in this book, which I don't have time to read you because I've got too many exciting doggy passages to read you, but it's the one where the dogs are rescued by a King Charles Spaniel, the 2 adult dogs, when they're looking for their puppies. And they're fed the King Charles Spaniel's tea, and the King Charles Spaniel keeps giving them slices of toast which have just been toasted over the fire using a 2-pronged fork, and bowls of tea, which is what the King Charles Spaniel has every day because he lives in a very posh aristocratic house. And it's such a lovely scene, and it's a total scene of warmth and beauty and temporary happiness. It's the port within the storm. So 101 Dalmatians, if you can, definitely read it. If you haven't read it ever, you're totally in for a treat. And if you have read it in childhood, go back and read it again. So just another couple of children's books to mention before I go on to the slightly older ones. Kanzuki's Kingdom, which is a wonderful book about a boy who gets swept overboard from his boat with his dog, is another story which has a really wonderful canine-human companionship by Michael Morpurgo. And furthermore, we've also got the wonderful One Dog and His Boy, which was Eva Ibbetson's last story that she wrote before she died. Eva Ibbetson is an amazing author. We absolutely love her. She's fantastic. And her most famous book is Journey to the River Sea. But this book, One Dog and His Boy, is another great story all about Hal, whose parents refused to let him have a dog until they discover the Easy Pets dog agency and they get him a dog for the weekend. But Hal is determined this dog will not just be for the weekend. So that's another great doggy children's story. I just must mention Snowy in Tintin, who is a fantastic canine companion, who is always there, often being more intelligent than his master, and fantastic drawings. He's just a great character and ever present within these wonderful graphic novels. But now to move on to one of my favourite dogs ever in literature, Manchi, the dog, in The Knife of Never Letting Go. But before I read it, I've just seen Tracy's comment saying, your dog is adorable. Thanks, Tracy. Tracy has 2 toy poodles. That's fantastic, Tracy. So put a picture on Facebook, please. I'd love to see them. One of them is Apricot, which means she's a redhead. Also, she might be a similar colour to Beetle. So I know I'm going to get very distracted by everyone else's canine companions and thoughts, but I'm going to talk a bit about Manchi in The Knife of Never Letting Go. Manchi is the devoted companion of Todd, who is a boy becoming a man. He's 13 and he lives in a world where everyone can hear each other's thoughts. They hear what they call noise, which is the permanent noise of people's thoughts, but it's not just people's thoughts, it's also animals' thoughts. So Todd, our hero, can hear the thoughts of his dog. He can also hear the thoughts of horses, birds, and all other creatures in the world in which he lives. And this is the first in a trilogy called the Chaos Walking trilogy, which I would completely recommend. They're brilliant for young adults, but also brilliant for adult readers. I'm a major fan. And they take a little bit of getting used to when you first dive in because of the way that they're written, the fact that you hear the noise constantly through the book. And sometimes Patrick Ness, the author, puts in the noise in a kind of graphic style like this. So you can see, or you can almost see the noise and feel the invasion of the noise into your brain. But it's a brilliant read once you get used to the slightly different style. And also Todd speaks in a slightly illiterate way, so you have to get used to his voice as well. I'll just read you a little bit so you get a flavour of the book and of his relationship with Manchi. And I won't give you spoilers about what happens because it's incredibly dramatic and really exciting. This is chapter 1, The Hole in the Noise. The first thing you find out when your dog learns to talk is that dogs don't got nothing much to say about anything. Need a poo, Todd? Shut up, Manchi. Poo, Todd? I said, shut it. We're walking across the wild fields southeast of town, those ones that slope down to the river and head on towards the swamp. Ben sent me to pick him up some swamp apples, and he's made me take Manchi with me, even though we all know Cillian only brought him to stay on Mayor Prentice's good side. And so suddenly, here's this brand new dog as a present for my birthday last year, when I never said I wanted any dog. That's what I said I wanted, was for Cillian to finally fix the fishing bike, so I wouldn't have to walk every forsaken place in this stupid town. But oh no, happy birthday, Todd. Here's a brand new puppy, Todd. And even though you don't want him, even though you never asked for him, guess who has to feed him and train him and wash him and take him for walks and listen to him jabber now he's got old enough for the talking germ to set his mouth moving. Guess who? Pooh, Manchi barked quietly to himself. Pooh, pooh, pooh. Just have your stupid poo and quit yapping about it. I take a switch of grass from beside the trail and I swat after him with it. I don't reach him. I didn't mean to reach him, but he just laughs his little barking laugh and carries on down the trail. I follow after him, switching the switch against the grass on either side, squinting from the sun, trying not to think about nothing at all. We don't need apples from the swamp, truth to tell. Ben can buy them at Mr. Phelps's store if he really wants them. Also true, going to the swamp to pick a few apples is not a job for a man, because men are never allowed to be so idle. Now, I won't officially become a man for 30 more days. I've lived 12 years of 13 long months, each and another 12 months besides, all of which living means I'm still 1 month away from the big birthday. The plans are being planned, the preparations prepared, it will be a party. I guess, though I'm starting to get some strange pictures about it, all dark and too bright at the same time, but nevertheless I will become a man, and picking apples in the swamp is not a job for a man, or even an almost man. I won't go on. You then get lots of Manchi the dog saying, squirrel, squirrel, and hungry, hungry, ow, Todd, ow, and so on. Manchi, the dog, is a very devoted hound who appears to not be super intelligent, as most of what he talks about is needing a poo and being hungry. But as the book goes on, Manchi is absolutely indispensable to Todd. And Todd goes through some extremely grown-up adventures when he slowly does become a man and he has to effectively lead an army. And Manchi is always there by his side, and Manchi is actually self-sacrificial in a very devoted, loving and wonderful way. So The Knife of Never Letting Go is a really fantastic book in which there's one of the best dogs in literature. Another one which is brilliant and is more of a young adult book is Melvin Burgess's Lady, My Life as a Bitch, which is quite controversial. Some would say that it's more of an adult book than a young adult, but it is written for young adults. And on the back of the cover, you'll see this missing sign saying, "Have you seen this girl? The police are concerned to discover the whereabouts of Sandra Francie, who was last seen in the company of an unknown man at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She was wearing a brown hooded fleece-type coat and velvet trousers." So she is missing. And we realise very early on in the book that Sandra has been transformed into a dog. And I really love this book because it's about teenagers basically being really horny, really fed up with adults, and just desperate to experience life in all its manifest wonder. And Sandra, when she becomes a dog, is actually pretty thrilled. She has quite a fantastic time. But then it gets a little bit complicated and she wonders whether she wants to stay as a dog or whether it's better to stay as a dog or become human again. We're getting a bit of feline action as well, which is quite exciting. They tend not to get on too well, but luckily Beetle seems to be quite half asleep, so not that interested. I'll just read you a tiny bit out of Lady, My Life as a Bitch, so that you will hear her voice when she becomes a dog. "The running was so good. I didn't know why. I never liked to run. Even though I was scared, I had this big thrill about going so fast, and even after I knew the tramp was miles away, I still kept running and running, and I couldn't understand how it was I wasn't out of breath. All around me the world was changing. The cars, the dustbins, the grass, the dog shit on the tarmac, the feet that had been and gone. Everything left its taste on my tongue. Things were crowding into my mouth and my nose. At the same time, everything I could see was moving further away and growing tall and slow at the same time. The world was changing shape, growing in one direction, closing down in others. I was in one weird state. As I came herring round by Yew Tree Road and turned into the estate, I remember thinking, it must be fear's done this to me. My house was only 50 metres away, about 2 seconds at my speed, and I started howling and barking, "Mum! Mum! Mum!" at the top of my voice as I got close. I jumped right over the little brick wall at our front and ran round the back and in the door. Mum was in the kitchen. "God, Jesus!" she yelled as I came in. "Mum! Mum! Mum! I've had this terrible scare! Mum!" I shouted, and I flung myself at her. Mum screamed. When I stopped in my tracks, she looked terrified. I've never seen such a look on her face. "Get away!" she screamed. "Back! Back! Shoo!" She reached out and grabbed hold of the frying pan and flung it at me. I just stood there. I was like a dummy. I watched the oil spilling out in a silver flash, and then the pan caught me right on the side of my face. That is the beginning of the story, and we realise rapidly that Sandra has been transformed into a dog, and the whole of the rest of the book is about her adventures as a female dog, hence the title, Lady, My Life is a Bitch. It's hilarious and outrageous and fantastic, and really one of my favourite dog-related books. Another one, which is on a kind of similar vein, but different because there's no transformation, is called Dog Boy by Eva Horner. Unfortunately, I don't have the physical book because I read it on Kindle, this one. But it's by an Australian author, Eva Horner, and this is an adult book, which is fantastic. Oh, Tracy, you said you read Lady. That's brilliant. And I remember recommending it to you. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. It's such a good read, isn't it? Really fun. So Dog Boy by Eva Horner is all about a feral boy who genuinely existed in Moscow. So it's based on a true story of a boy called Ivan Mikhail, who was discovered on the streets of Roitova near Moscow, living with a pack of dogs. He was 6 years old and he'd been with the pack for 2 years because he'd been abandoned by his mother, or he might have actually wandered away from his apartment that she shared with an alcoholic boyfriend. So this was a true story, and Eva Horner took this true story and turned it into an absolutely riveting novel. It's quite gritty, like a lot of these dog books are, and it's also quite grim in some ways because the boy who is abandoned in this version is 4 years old, which is similar to the real life events, and he wakes up in a flat with no adults there, and he has to survive through the winter in a flat with no food and no help. He's only 4. What can he do? So he starts off by eating everything that he can find in the cupboards and in the fridge, but that rapidly runs out, and he starts to explore outside, even though he's been told by his parents and responsible adults when they were there that he should never go outside his flat. But he obviously has to eventually go out because otherwise he's going to die of starvation. So when he wanders out, he is in a way fortunate enough to stumble across a yellow-haired dog who he becomes fascinated by, and he slowly starts to follow this yellow-haired street dog, and he ends up managing to join the family of the dog who has lots of little puppies, and he effectively becomes one of the puppies of this street dog living in Moscow in sub-zero temperatures that go down to minus 30 degrees. And one might imagine that this is impossible, but we know that it really did happen. So Eva Horner has taken a huge leap of imagination and got into the head of the boy and imagined what it's like to live with a pack of dogs. And she does it brilliantly. So I'm going to read you a little bit now. For a little while, Ramochka, who's the child, was much like a fifth puppy, a dependent to be fed and guarded. He was shoved, tumbled, bitten and licked. He was told off and shamed. For his part, he tried hard to please and became downcast when he was snarled into submission. For a while, he emulated the puppies in everything. They grew rapidly and soon outclassed him in every way he could see. He practiced their agile moves. He tried to listen to what they heard and to smell Mamochka before she appeared, the way they did. Yet, he could do many things they couldn't. For one thing, he stroked Mamochka when he was nursing from her teat. So when you first see him nursing from the dog's teat, it's quite a shocking moment. But he's a starving 4-year-old boy living in freezing temperatures in Moscow. What can one expect? And it's actually rather beautiful and lovely as the book goes on to see the way that he really becomes dog-like, and he imitates the dogs. He tries to emulate their behaviour. He pees in the same places that they pee so as to mark his scent. And you completely get into the psychology of dogs when you read this book. So for anyone that does have dogs and loves dogs, it's a really great read because you do feel like you understand dogs more after reading it. I'll just read you a tiny bit more, which is about his dog psychology in a way. He knew when the dogs were pleased. He could feel it and see it in the way they used their bodies. Their joyous wriggle and the smile of a sweeping tail were an immediately comprehensible body of happiness. Mamochka's contented sighs in their bed filled him too with bliss. He knew when someone was annoyed because they bit him. He learned teeth, the friendliness of a gesture that held teeth low and unthreatening, and slowly all the gradations from bared teeth threat, lip-veiled threat, and teeth set aside or used for play. He found himself quickly fitting in with teeth serious and teeth playful, reading easily the bodies around him with eyes, fingers, nose and tongue. Everything was ritual. He began to emulate the greeting in which every absence was healed. He made his body joyous too, his head low, mouth small. He yelped in delight and licked the mouth corners of the older dogs as they entered. The greeting was also the moment of all confessions. Body joyous or body contrite, pure of spirit or guilt-ridden, waiting for punishment. The dogs all confessed truthfully to each other at first meeting, crawling low with face averted, then rolling over to take whatever punishment was theirs. Usually their abasement was enough. If the puppies had exceeded their boundaries, or eaten golden bitch's bones, or ripped up the bed and spread it around, they told on themselves as soon as an adult entered. Ramochka could not bring himself to do the same. He lied, body joyous, and both Black Dog and Golden Bitch were bewildered and disturbed. They bit him less and less. Mamochka still punished him, making him roll over onto his back when she discovered his smell outside the lair or in the destroyed nest. One evening it snowed on and into the night, and then when the late day came, everything was changed, muted. The light inside the lair had dimmed. The parts of the floor above that were exposed to the sky, were covered. So at that point, the boy, having been stuck inside, underneath a basement of a huge high-rise building, they're living in the basement, unknown to the humans. That's when he goes out for the first time into the snow. And in this book, the boy lives as a dog until he's about 8 or even 9. And in real life, the boy was discovered by humans when he was 6 and he was brought back into society. But in Eva Horner's version, it takes longer, and I won't tell you what happens. But it's a book that really asks you a lot of interesting questions about what it's like to be a dog and what it's like to be a human blending in with a dog. So it's a bit of a, in a way, Mowgli, Jungle Story, or even Tarzan, but much more modern and much more vivid and realistic, I would say. So, Bill and Jenny, lovely to see you. Tomorrow is an unusual story, but enjoyable. I think that's a book you've told me about before, Bill, and I must read it. I'm assuming that it has a big dog aspect, and I'm remembering that. Maybe you could write a little bit so that I could tell other people about what tomorrow is about, because it's ringing lots of bells, but I have to admit I haven't read it, so do tell if you can. moving on to another favourite, which is actually apparently one of Beetle's all-time favourites. Beetle, are you going to say hello? Come and say hello, Beetle. Oh, you're being very quiet and sleepy and not joining in, which is a bit sad. Beetle, let me give you a treat. Come and talk to us. Come and talk to us. Come and tell us about 15 dogs. Go on, are you one of 15 dogs? No, you're only one. You're the only one that matters tonight. So 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis is a Canadian novel which is all about the gods taking a bet on humanity, as they are prone and likely to do in many a tall tale. So Apollo and Hermes are having a quiet drink at the Wheat Chief Tavern in Toronto's Hyde Park at the beginning of the book. They're discussing humanity as gods do, and they end up agreeing a wager in a godly way. They say, let's give animals human intelligence. And Apollo claims that if they do that, the animals will end up even more unhappy than humans are. They happen to be near a veterinary clinic where there are 15 dogs being kennelled overnight. So they become the guinea pigs, so to speak, for this Olympian experiment. So the gods, Apollo and Hermes, wave their magic wand or do whatever they have to do to make this divine happening occur. And the dogs all gain human intelligence, but they do it slowly. So in a way it's realistic, we believe in it. The dogs' first glimmerings of intelligence are rather sad, because Rosie, the German shepherd, finds herself thinking about her last litter, thinking suddenly it seemed grossly unfair that one should go through the trouble of having pups only to lose track of them, which is a very kind of human thought, some would say. Atticus, a Neapolitan mastiff, is having his favourite dream about chasing rats and squirrels, but at the moment when he bites down on his prey's neck in his dream, it occurred to him that the creature must feel pain. That thought, vivid and unprecedented, woke him from sleep. The dogs manage to open their cages, and soon they are outside. 3 of them are scared to use their new freedom, and they remain inside with their human intelligence, which is an utterly tragic event, which you can't imagine happening. But the remaining 12 head for the lake shore. Tracy, thanks for coming. Catch up later. Not all of the dogs are happy with their accelerated evolution. Atticus becomes the pack's de facto leader, and he, at one point, after they've all had their human intelligence for a few weeks, says, we must learn to be dogs again. And there's an interesting play on the idea of going back to true dogginess and going back to your primitive roots in a way like we might, as humans, think that it's a good idea to go back to our instinctive roots. And they end up performing doggishness, making barking sounds rather than simply barking. So they are kind of performing dogginess to the humans around them, so that the humans think that they are still proper dogs, not dogs with human intelligence. So it's all quite meta in many ways. Then there's a night when some of the dogs, they turn against each other and they try and eliminate the dogs who are disagreeing with them. The majority tries to eliminate the minority, which is all quite awful as well. And there's quite a lot of pretty mad twists in this book, 15 Dogs, which was an award winner in Canada. It's a very funny, dark, quite grim tale, but it is a kind of fantastical idea which really makes you think about human intelligence versus canine intelligence. And it, of course, is commenting very much on humanity through the perspective of the dogs and the way that they live with us or are abused and neglected by us. I've just had a comment from Bill talking about the book Tomorrow, which he was mentioning earlier, which is by Damien Dibben. And Bill says, it's the story of a dog crossing continents and centuries in search of the man he loves. Fantastic, a kind of incredible journey, but with just the one dog crossing continents. I've got to read that. Thank you, Bill. That's a great suggestion. It would be wrong to have an evening of dog literature in which we don't mention The Call of the Wild by Jack London, written in 1902, which is a truly excellent doggy book, all about a dog who is brought up as a domestic pet, but he is kidnapped and becomes a sled dog, but then he becomes a highly valued and intelligent and brilliant sled dog. He has many fantastic adventures, and the whole book is about his call between whether to love humanity and be a kind of pet and human's best friend, or whether to actually go into the wild and answer the call of the wild. And like many of these doggy books, a bit like I was reading the section from Lady, My Life as a Bitch, a lot of the joy of the books is the sheer exuberance of life, the fact that we feel as writers and as readers that when you're a dog, you're going to get so much more excitement and full glory of all your senses, your smell and your taste, and you're reveling in simply being alive. And that's very much the case in The Call of the Wild. Here's a little extract to give you that idea. He was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint and sinew, in that it was everything that was not death, that it was aglow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars. Just a tiny bit more. There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life and beyond which life cannot rise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes when one is most alive, and it comes as a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this forgetfulness of living, comes to the artist, caught up and out of himself in a sheet of flame. It comes to the soldier, war mad in a stricken field and refusing quarter. And it came to Buck, leading the pack, sounding the old wolf cry, straining after the food that was alive and that fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. So that's The Call of the Wild. If you haven't read it, now is the time to seize that book. It's another fantastic dog-related book in which we effectively live as a dog for the whole novel. But it's not a long novel. It will only take a couple of hours to read. Virginia Woolf, rather surprisingly, one might say, devoted a whole book to a dog called Flush. And the book itself is called Flush. And it's all about Elizabeth Barrett Browning's spaniel, who lived from 1840 to 54. So the direct inspiration for this book was a new edition of the Brownings' Love Letters, which was published in 1930. And Virginia Woolf fell completely in love with the figure of their dog. She says, "It made me laugh, so I couldn't resist making him a life." So the book Flush is a very short novella by Virginia Woolf, and it's highly readable, highly imaginative. On one level, a great story simply about Elizabeth Barrett Browning's spaniel, but on another level, it is a social commentary about the behaviour of the time. It brings Woolf's unsentimental humour and insight to the fore. We see Flush being the loyal confidant to Elizabeth in her sickbed at Wimpole Street. She's actually ill a lot during the book. I think she's ill for about 9 months. I can't remember quite what was wrong with her. And Flush, the dog, is given human emotions by Woolf, but it's completely unsentimental, I have to underline. It's a very enjoyable, humorous, and not rosy-tinted book. But Flush is highly jealous when Elizabeth Barrett falls in love with the poet Browning, and when they elope and go off for their new life in Italy. So it's actually a brilliant introduction to Woolf for people that haven't read Woolf or who might have been put off by some of her harder reads. It's commonly read as a modernist consideration of city life. seen through the eyes of a dog. But it also serves as a harsh criticism of the supposedly unnatural ways of living in the city. So the dog does have quite a lot of social commentary, which makes it all the more enjoyable. Now, moving on to Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, which sadly I also don't have as a physical book. That is a brilliant memoir by John Steinbeck, written in 1960, all about his travels through America with Charlie, his standard poodle. And it's a really great read. It's quite a gentle book. There are no big dramas, but you get a wonderful sense of John Steinbeck's eccentricity as a man. He talks about how he just feels the urge to go out on the road. He leaves his wife at home. He wrote it when he was in his 60s. He's a little bit curmudgeonly, but he keeps saying that he wants to just keep going, doing his own thing until he drops dead by accident. He doesn't want to take any kind of ways of sitting down and chilling out. So he gets this house made for him, which is like a kind of shack, which is put onto the back of a lorry, or not exactly a lorry, but a big American vehicle. And this house has all the accoutrements that you can need. It would probably look a bit like a modern garden office, which I think it might even have a chimney. It's kind of like a little mini house with all the things that you might need. So he puts this onto his big truck, puts Charlie the dog in it, and off he goes, traveling on the road. And you just get lots of lovely comments about what America was like in the 1960s as he goes through the different states. And Charlie the dog is a really lovely, eccentric standard poodle who is quite old himself, has quite a lot of health difficulties, has to go to the vet. So Steinbeck spends an extra 4 days in Kansas, I think, while he's waiting for Charlie the dog to be looked at, to have his prostate looked at. And it's kind of paralleling the way that Steinbeck feels at times is paralleled in Charlie's life as well. And they just have a really great relationship. Steinbeck is very respectful to Charlie the dog. And the dog is not actually a huge presence in the book, but he's just referred to quite frequently. And it's a really lovely, gentle read. So that's Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, something that you might not expect him to have written if you've only ever read his novels. Then another one that I recently read and loved is The Friend by Sigrid Nunes, which was written in 2019. And this is a pretty unusual novel, which almost reads like a memoir, but it is actually fiction, which is about an unnamed female narrator who, one of her good friends, commits suicide at the beginning of the book. And he unexpectedly leaves this unnamed narrator a very, very large dog who's a Great Dane called Apollo, who weighs 180 pounds. And our narrator doesn't want a dog. She had no idea that the dog was going to be left to her, and I don't think she'd even particularly met the dog before her friend committed suicide. But she clearly holds a flame for this guy who killed himself, and she feels a responsibility to accept the gift of the dog, Apollo, which she does. She embraces him and she brings him into her Manhattan apartment where you're not allowed dogs. So she has to deal with this enormous Great Dane in a very small Manhattan apartment. And the Great Dane is mourning his companion, his human companion, who was the man who killed himself. And so he is in a deep, deep depression. And the Great Dane spends most of the book lying around being sad and getting onto her bed, which she was expressly told she shouldn't do. But actually, she's kind of lonely herself. And so she very much falls in love with the dog too. And through hanging out with the dog, Apollo, she begins to slowly accept the loss of her friend. So it is about mourning. It's a very sad, nostalgic, thoughtful, pensive book, but it's also about being a writer in the present day, because the heroine is a writer and the friend that committed suicide was also a writer. It's about the literary world, and it's also about love, about loving people and about loving dogs. And it's another really great meditation on companionship, as so many of these wonderful doggy books are. Somewhat in the same vein as The Friend by Sigrid Nunes, we have Timbuktu by Paul Oster, which is also a fantastic novel which I only recently discovered. And this is about a dog called Mr. Bones, who travels around with his companion Willie, also known as Mr. Christmas. And it's told kind of not in the first person, but through the eyes mostly of Mr. Bones, the dog. And he is talking about his relationship with Willie, his human companion, but also about the other humans that he's known in his life. He's thinking about what it means to die himself, what's going to happen when his human companion dies. Harper, great to see you. Thanks for joining me this evening. I wonder if you have any favourite dogs in literature. Do tell me if you do. And I wonder if Mimi might be with you. She might have some thoughts too. So Timbuktu is one of the doggy books that I've recently enjoyed the most. And I will read you a little bit out of it because it's written in quite a kind of doggy, panty way. But it's also, being a Paul Auster novel, full of really fantastic vocabulary, amazing ideas. It's really thought-provoking. Not a lot of plot happens, but it's a really enjoyable read. So let me just read you a little bit of it and you'll get a flavour and you'll see if you think you'd like it. It's another slightly unexpected book. I think lots of these canine books from great authors do seem unexpected, but I guess it shouldn't be unexpected when so many people are lovers of the canine. There was so much to absorb, so much evidence to assimilate, decipher, and make sense of that. Willie hardly knew where to begin. So this is Willie watching the dog. The wagging tail as opposed to the tail between the legs, the pricked ears as opposed to the flaccid ears, the rolling onto the back, the running in circles, the anus sniffs and growls, the kangaroo hops and mid-air turns, the stalking crouch, the bared teeth, the cocked head, and 100 other minute particulars, each one an expression of a thought, a feeling of pain, an urge. It was like learning how to speak a new language, Willie found, like stumbling onto a long-lost tribe of primitive men and having to figure out their impenetrable mores and customs. Once he had surmounted the initial barriers, what intrigued him most was the conundrum he referred to as the eye-nose paradox, or the senses census. Willie was a man, and therefore he relied chiefly on sight to form his understanding of the world. Mr. Bones was a dog, and therefore he was next to blind. His eyes were useful to him only in that they helped to distinguish shapes, to make out the broad outlines of things, to tell him whether the object of being that loomed up before him was a hazard to be shunned or an ally to be kissed. For true knowledge, for a genuine grasp of reality in all its manifold configurations, only the nose was of any value. We all know how important noses are to dogs. Very much true of Beetle here. Where was I? Whatever Mr. Bones knew of the world, whatever he'd discovered in the way of insights or passions or ideas, he'd been led to by his sense of smell. At first, Willie could scarcely believe his eyes. The dog's avidity for smells seemed boundless, and once he'd found an odour that interested him, he would clamp his nose over it with such determination, such whole-hog enthusiasm, that everything else in the world would cease to exist. His nostrils were turned into suction tubes, sniffing up scents in the way a vacuum cleaner inhales bits of broken glass. And there were times, many times in fact, when Willie marvelled that the sidewalk did not crack apart from the force and fury of Mr. Bones's snout work. Normally, the most obliging of creatures, the dog would grow stubborn, distracted, seemed to forget his master entirely, and if Willie happened to tug on the leash before Mr. Bones was ready to move on, before he had ingested the full savour of the turd or urine puddle under scrutiny, he would plant his legs to resist the yank, and so unbridgeable did he become, so firmly did he anchor himself to the spot, that Willie often wondered if there wasn't a sac hidden somewhere in his paws that could secrete glue on command. So that's a moment where Willie, who is a kind of poet tramp, is first getting to know Mr. Bones the dog, who he adopts. And it's all about their companionship, their travels. Willie, the tramp poet, is attempting to make one last journey to see one last friend of his before he dies. But he doesn't know if that friend is going to be there when he gets there, because he hasn't seen that friend for 20 years. So it is actually quite a tragic tale, but a really beautiful and amazing one. So that's Timbuktu, Paul Oster, fantastic. I just want to mention a couple of sci-fi dogs before we come to an end. So Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky is all about a dog who's half dog, half bio creature, bioform, who has been made by humans to be a weapon of mass destruction, essentially. So this is a great book, Dogs of War, really interesting. Adrian Tchaikovsky, great writer, all about Rex, who's 7 foot tall, bulletproof, bristling with heavy caliber weaponry, and his voice resonates with subsonics, especially designed to instill fear. So this dog creature, bioform creature, has been created along with dragon, honey, and bees, who are all creatures of different bioforms. They're a multiform assault pack operating in a lawless anarchy in Mexico in a kind of dystopian future. And Rex is a deadly weapon, but he's also dog at heart. So he has loyalty and love of humanity, and he's not actually a bad creature, but he has been programmed to be a weapon of mass destruction. So he's very confused, and he doesn't really know what to do, and he finds it very difficult to make moral decisions. And Planty's just asking me, have you read Lives of the Monster Dogs? No, I haven't, and I wonder if that's a bit of a similar idea. You're going to have to tell me, Planty. Maybe you can put a little summary of it on Instagram if you've got time. So Dogs of War, it's a great read. It does ask all these very interesting moral questions, as does also Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov, which is very much a political satire. I think it was written in about 1910, and it's quite a difficult read in a way because it's quite grim. It's about a dog who is taken off the streets of Moscow and transformed into a very low-grade human. And Bulgakov is completely satirising the political situation in Russia at the time. And it is brilliant, but it's kind of depressing, in some ways more depressing than Dogs of War that I was just describing, because the dog created in this book, the dog man, is quite a kind of awful specimen of humanity with really not a lot good going for him, whereas in Dogs of War, Rex is kind of a good guy, a good dog underneath all the weird changes that he's had done to him. But it is brilliant, and Mikhail Bulgakov is one of my favourite ever writers, having written Master and Margarita, which, as many of you will know, is one of my favourite ever books. So it's definitely worth a read. I think on that note, I better come to an end, because although there are still lots of lovely books that I haven't had time to talk about, I will post them on my Instagram page. You can also go and look at the bookshop page, link through the Damien Bar Literary Salon Facebook, where there's a list of all the books that I've mentioned and some more that I haven't had a chance to mention tonight. And next month on Damien Bar's Literary Salon Facebook page and Instagram, I'm going to be talking about artists in literature. That's on the 15th of September. That's going to be really fun. Can't wait for that one. And October is Black History Month, so I'm going to be talking about literature on that theme. Also check out my Facebook sessions on my Elabertu page. Next week I'm hoping to do vineyards in literature at our local vineyard on Wolstonbury Hill, but that is subject to weather conditions. And just stay in touch with me on Instagram and Facebook generally. I just want to mention a question that was put to me on this page before I wind up for the night, which was from Helen Williams, who asked, do you think that human-animal companions, though a very ancient thing, will be a guide to our future relationship with nature? Which I do think is a brilliant question. And I hope that that question has been to some degree answered by some of the canine books that I've been talking about tonight. For instance, Dogs of War, I think, is a particularly interesting answer to that question, because it's all about adjusted bioforms where we become, well, dogs become partly human and partly machine and partly weapon. But also I think it is a question that I need to delve into more deeply, because there's quite a lot of books on that very subject, such as books that delve into nature, like The Hidden Life of Trees, and there's the book about fungi by Merlin Sheldrake, which is a really fantastic book about the consciousness of fungi, the consciousness of trees in The Hidden Life of Trees. And I think the consciousness of other natural beings is something that people are beginning to describe and enter into and conjecture about more and more. And it's a really great topic of discussion. So one last thing, if you missed Damien Barr's fantastic event last night on BBC iPlayer, you can still watch it. Damien Barr in Search of Sir Walter Scott. So that was on last night at 10 p.m. and you can still catch it on BBC iPlayer. And in fact, I think it's available for at least 10 months. So do watch it, because that's Damien getting to wear a kilt and going in search of Sir Walter Scott, who is a fascinating and brilliant man. And I'm just going to see if Beetle is going to say goodnight to you all. Beetle, you going to say goodnight? You going to say goodnight? Or are you too tired? I think she's too sleepy. She's really not that interested. There I was thinking that she was going to be jumping around, joining in. But frankly, she just wants to go to sleep. Fair enough. So thanks for joining me tonight. Great to have you here. Lovely to see you. And I will see you either next week or in a month's time. Goodbye.